between you and me, right where you are right in this moment, is exactly where you were meant to be. So, wherever that may be, just be.
To be a new you.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Joygasmic Life podcast.
Your permission slip to raise your standards and live an even more amazing life. Now, if you're feeling like that's way out of the ball game and you're really suffering with like pain in your body, guilt, shame, anxiety, depression, like these emotions run a lot of people's lives, and that's not by accident. Our culture is set up to keep us in those emotions because it's easier to control people when they're in those emotions. But if you're on an awakening journey and you have recognized that those are there, you have taken the most crucial step to get out of that, which is to become aware that it's actually happening. It's time to awaken, to bring all the parts of yourself back to this present moment and explore the joy that is your life when you live full out, fully expressed, fully harnessing the joygasmic potential of your body and yourself. Anything is possible, and especially we are here to tell you that deep and fulfilling love is possible and is available for you when you choose that for yourself. Dr. Sierra has dedicated her practice of naturopathic medicine to serving babies and their parents. Her approach to care is always baby-centered. A thriving baby equals a thriving mama and a thriving family. It is a fact that prenatal life in the first 5 years are the most impactful on human development. Dr. Sierra addresses health on all levels, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Everything she creates serves as a resource to support pregnancy and provide the best natural and conventional tools to ensure baby's optimal growth and mama's well-being. Naturopathic medical care places a significant emphasis on preventative medicine, or in other words, the cultivation and maintenance of health. A baby-centered approach to care is the ultimate expression of preventative medicine. Dr. Sierra can be reached through her website, babycentered.com, or by email or Instagram, which are available in the show notes. I so look forward to sharing this interview, and if you haven't already checked out some of the resources around preventing challenges in pregnancy by clearing out glyphosate before pregnancy even occurs, please check in some of the information that I'm providing as well as what Dr. Sierra shares in this episode about cleansing before pregnancy.
So welcome, Sierra. I'm so glad to have you on the Joygasmic Life podcast, and I'm looking forward to diving into all things fertility and preconception today. Thank you so much for being here on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for those people, I've read your bio, but for those people who are just getting to know you, can you give me a little bit of information? How did you get into working with families and babies?
It's really a culmination of my entire adult life, which has always been on the path of healing. So in my undergrad studies, I was a psychology major, and then I got into massage therapy, and then yoga, and then oriental medicine and energy medicine. And that led me to naturopathic medical school. And in all of those systems, so psychology, massage, oriental medicine, all the systems really, as you dive in, they point to the prenatal window, the prenatal time of life, so time in utero, and our earliest years are the most formative on essentially the entire trajectory of our life in terms of our physical well-being and our mental emotional well-being. So trauma experienced in the womb shows very distinct patterns as development progresses. So all these different systems kept pointing me back to this time of life. And then also my natural inclination is I love babies and kids. I just find that they're so naturally in the moment and
Absolutely.
present that it's such a joy to be with them, because you just get to really be in this present moment awareness space, which is almost always fun. So
Absolutely.
I keep gravitating back to this time. The biggest impact is this specific energy medicine system that I studied, which is an Oriental medicine. And also the woman who I learned from is a neuropsychologist. So she really bridges Western and Eastern philosophies. And the
Wonderful.
entire premise of her healing system is the prenatal origins of health. So it's really learning, it's a healing journey that gets you back to that root, the like ultimate root cause of healing, and teaches you self-care applications to balance your nervous system in a way that repairs that your earliest wounds, your earliest experiences of trauma. So it's the resolution of trauma, that particular system. And then all the dots just started connecting for me in terms of, so my bias is towards preventative medicine and really optimizing human potential. And so for me, it's like a no-brainer then to focus on the prenatal, even preconception time, because actually, if we really focus in on prenatal, we need to take one more step and look at preconception, because so many ways to think about it. But basically, the state of both the sperm and the egg, the mother and the father, prior to conceiving, is also at play here. So we can think about it on like an energetic spiritual level, but also like I always have to turn on my science brain because that's just the society we live in. And
Yeah,
the more science dives into this, like we're looking at genetics all the time, and epigenetics is actually the science that genetics can be modified and based on experience. And so in this preconception window, we can actually modify genetic expression.
Woo.
So
Mm.
that's just kind of my focus right now, because everything leads me back to that point. And I really believe in human potential, and that our essence is to just be so connected and feel love and joy, to have a joygasmic life. Like
Yeah.
that's just my disposition. So that's where I chose to focus my energies on my practice and everything that I create.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, you touched on so many things that are like juicy and exciting for me there. I think we ended up sort of talking about babies and birth and conception for some of the same reasons, which is, there's a lot of work to be done on the existing human species as it exists, but if we can prepare this next generation in a different way, if we can give them absolutely the best start, like that's the legacy that we're passing on. That's the genetic lineage that we're passing on. And absolutely, if we can do that with as little trauma as possible, as little pain as possible, with as much nutrition as possible, without sort of all of our own emotional baggage and challenging baggage going on, that's absolutely important. And I mean, from an energetic standpoint, I remember it was like a week or two before my son was conceived, and it was like an unconscious conception. I didn't really know that's what I was doing at the time, but nevertheless, I did work on my conception right before he was conceived, and it's like I was right at the beginning of my wake up journey, so I didn't actually know that's what was happening. But
Wow.
like, oh, like I cleared space in my energetic field
Yeah.
for the experience of having a baby come through joyful sex rather than challenging sex, which is sort of the story that I was holding on to, that I had been conceived from challenging or unpleasant sex rather
Yeah.
than joyful, joygasmic, beautiful sex. And I think
Yeah.
that leads us really, really well into sort of this topic of infertility and what's going on in the world in terms of people not being able to conceive babies. IVF, intro vitro fertilization. I shouldn't have even tried. Uh, is
Got it.
is like on the rise. It's hugely expensive, like tens of thousands of dollars, multiple rounds, invasive procedures, all sorts of stuff. And there's so much stuff, so many things that we can try outside of that sort of that IVF to either help that process or to just not even need that process and literally allow the body to conceive on its own. So can you tell me a little bit about sort of where people are at when they, when they start working with you? Have they often been trying to conceive and it's not working, or are they sort of looking to like I encountered you because I'm looking to conceive, and I was like, how do I do this in the best way possible? So do you get people from both camps, or is it sort of more
Yeah.
one than the other?
I have people from both camps. So I will say that the I've done polls and all the Facebook groups, all the moms groups. And so on my, very unscientific data collection,
Yep.
but in my experience, the vast majority of people are conceiving without really putting any thought into it prior. They're just kind of going
Mm,
for it. So maybe they
yeah.
are taking a prenatal vitamin and like cutting back on drinking a little bit, maybe, but for the most part, there's not much thought into like, oh, I want to have a baby in the next year. Let me look around and start like optimizing my health and my hormones and preparing our bodies and our home and our energy space and our healing work. Like that's like 25% of people that I've polled. And
Yeah.
so, however,
That's
that
exciting,
20,
actually. Like, that's exciting. Like 25%. Like for me, I thought the number would maybe be like 5 or like 2. So that's really exciting. But obviously you have like your own audience that's already interested in this kind of
yeah,
stuff. So 25% is still incredible. That's really
yeah.
exciting.
And so that sliver, piece of the pie is part of my group right now. Right now, I'm leading a preconception journey. It's a 4-course program. So I would say at least half of the women in that group are not currently experiencing any infertility issues as they're aware of, but they were already of the mindset that they were looking for something to prepare themselves, just
Yeah.
more health conscious individuals in general. And then
Yeah.
there are probably the other half or so right around there are experiencing infertility issues. And they're just at the beginning of considering like, are we gonna, because they might be coming up. So in conventional medicine, if you've been having unprotected sex for a year and have not achieved pregnancy, it's considered infertility. If
Right.
you're over 35, they give you 6 months. So
Okay.
that being said, there is a portion of my group and people who I've been communicating with who are in that camp as well. So I have a spectrum of people for sure. And the
Mhm.
good thing is everything I teach and everything I present will help all of those people, because
Yeah.
everything I'm putting forward is to optimize genetic expression, optimize hormone function, optimize reproductive organ function. So no matter what path people go down for conceiving their baby, they're going to be putting themselves at the best odds for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, healthy pregnancy is no small task. Like on any of those sort of mom boards, you're like, women are puking every day, multiple times a day. Women are, not able to get up. There's a huge amount of exhaustion. Their teeth are deteriorating. Like there's a whole bunch of sort of
It's
symptomology of underlying
Yeah.
health issues that maybe don't present themselves until you get pregnant. And it's like, that's an issue. It's an issue not only for the mom who's like now maybe has a second baby on the way and is really exhausted and tired, but
Yeah.
also for the baby, because it means that the mom's body is really not optimally nourished and in a hormonal space to be able to help and
Yeah.
create that
I
baby in
mean,
the most optimal way.
I was one of those moms and pregnant moms,
Mhm.
and um so that's part of why. So I was in my last semester of medical school when I got pregnant, and so I had already completed a lot of coursework on the importance of preconception planning. So that's like standard in our education is preconception protocols. Now,
Mhm.
even in conventional medicine, they emphasize like gynecologists, doctors, they emphasize the importance of preconception, like awareness for women of reproductive age. If they're having any unprotected sex, they should be on a prenatal vitamin, blah, blah, blah. But they don't really, it might be like 2 minutes in your visit with your doctor. And there's also no concept of like, okay, this woman's been on birth control for 10, 15 years. She wants to have a baby. It's like, oh, just pull the IUD out, turn off the pill, and like, go ahead, go for it. And from my training, it's like birth control pill depletes a lot of vitamins and minerals just because of the way your body has to process it. So there's at least a 3 to 6 month window to replete nutrients and really focus on hormones if a woman's been on birth control, etc. Anyway, that's just like a side note, but like
that's a whole topic. We could spend a whole hour and a half talking about hormonal birth control and some of the issues there, and maybe I'll have you come back and we can do.
But the fact is, pregnancy is extremely demanding on the body. There's no way around it. I mean, very few women. My sister-in-law just had a baby, and she was like blissed out, never had any nausea. She napped every day. That was the extent of it. But that's like, she's the only woman I've ever met who will tell me that with her pregnancy, a firsthand account. I prepared for almost a year before I got pregnant. I did cleanses. I was on all my supplements. I get acupuncture every couple of weeks. I'm a massage therapist. I'm getting massage. I'm going in the ocean every day, like blah, blah, blah. I love pregnancy. I love babies. I was so excited to be pregnant. Oh my God, goddess land, here we come. I was miserable. Absolute. The first trimester till about 20 weeks. I mean, I was excited, and there's this magic, and I could feel this like energy beam coming through me. Like I could feel the connection to like cosmic creative energy. I could feel that, and that was magical, and I loved it. But oh my God, was I sick and exhausted and just cried, like bloated, and I would call my midwife crying, like, I am a failure. I did it wrong, blah, blah, blah. And like, it just is what, I mean, you can do all you can do. That's another reason I emphasize the preconception, because then my diet was like rice cakes and peanut butter. And so it's like, thank God I prepared my body beforehand because I had a robust nutrient store. But my lesson from all of that was like, this is a gift to surrender and rest and slow down. And so I rested, and I allowed my body to rest and slow down. And that is what I needed. And, you know, unfortunately, most people don't, in our society, don't have that option. They have to keep powering through.
Yeah, which is super challenging and stress inducing, and stress has impacts on the hormones and on the, you know, the body functioning and on our nutrition, so many things. So
stress has a huge impact on the fetus as well. That's one of the most robust bodies of data that we have, even from the conventional world. It can retard growth of the fetus. It has really big implications on fetal development, like unchecked cortisol levels. Babies will be born addicted to cortisol, addicted to stress hormones. So it's like, but then I talk like that, and then people get stressed out about their stress. So I have to tread lightly.
There's ways to handle that. I totally cover that in the like Joygasmic birth course, how to work with the vagus nerve and the calming of that sort of fight flight system back into rest and digest. And you absolutely do not have to remove all of your stressors. You just need to learn how to deal with them differently, how to manage them differently, how to be sort of differently in your body when you have those stressors, right? So yeah. And I think, you know, this is a really great time to point out too that, you know, everybody's doing the best they can with what they know. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you can see that your first pregnancy, your second or third, one of your previous pregnancies, you were really stressed out, and you can see the impact of that on your children, it's like, just forgiveness, kindness, self-love. Like, you were doing absolutely the best that you knew how to do at the time. And now that you know better, you know, if you're planning for another pregnancy, you can absolutely set up a different nest for yourself. And that's what a lot of women are doing, is they're just going, we're going to set up a different nest.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest like point is to just like let go of any of that shame and guilt, and just like breathe through it and take it one moment at a time. It's all we can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So can we talk a little bit about that, sort of the stress and the hormones, and talk a little bit more deeply to me about how that actually does impact the fetus? Like what is that? Because we talk about sort of it's like a symbiotic relationship that the mom and the baby have. So what happens when the mom's getting stressed out to the baby on a physical level?
So first of all, the biggest stress hormone is cortisol. And maybe people hear that cortisol, maybe not. We can just stick to stress hormone. I get a little bit confused sometimes because a lot of my bubble is like other practitioners. So just please ask me to um, put it in more simple terms if I need to. But okay, so even before pregnancy, the stress hormone shares the same hormone lineage as the reproductive hormones. So the same precursors that make the reproductive hormones come from, um, they share the same precursors as the stress hormones.
Hmm.
So that's a chemical structure makeup that again goes through different enzyme pathways. And depending on what's going on in the body, if there's high stress, that chemical backbone will get shuttled into the stress hormone pathway, and then less will be available for the reproductive hormone pathway. So we call that the cortisol steal. So unchecked stress levels can literally steal from the reproductive hormones. So that can be an issue in infertility. In fact, I was just doing research on this and it's pretty cool. Well, it's nice. Like I like data, but I also have no problem connecting the dots with my own brain without the data. But for stress, there's a ton of,
Absolutely.
and couples who are experiencing infertility who go through different programs for stress management have significantly higher successful pregnancy rates. And it's, my brain connects that to the regulation of that stress hormone and allowing the reproductive hormones to balance themselves out.
Oh my gosh,
That's
that makes
one way.
so much sense.
So this is even prior, and that's just like super simple counseling sessions where they're in like a very conventional counseling setting of teaching them how to like manage stress and stressors. And then
Breathing, change your thoughts, that kind of stuff.
another way, even prior to conception, that stress has an impact on fertility and reproductive function is stress creates free radical damage to the cells themselves. So that means that it can, in that cellular environment, it damages the cells. So it can damage the health of the eggs. It can basically impact every stage of fertility from conception to implantation. And it's not only the stress hormone. This is where also all the other environmental toxins that essentially result in stress on the body,
Right.
they all feed into the same. I can send you some images that I use in my presentations if you post anything anywhere, I don't know, in the
Yeah,
comments or
for sure.
something.
If you send those to me, I'll make sure they get into the show notes. There's like a blog post that goes along with the podcast, so I'll make sure they get in there.
Yeah. So, and then, okay, so let's say conception happens, pregnancy is moving all along, all good. The stress hormone can easily cross the placenta and get into baby's system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point where it in the same regard that it can have like oxidative stress on the cells, it can have that stress on the developing fetus and actually get into the baby's bloodstream and has an impact on all different types of hormone processes.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. That just, I might like, part of me is just like, no, like that, just thinking about all the pregnant ladies out there who are like, and living in this like really, really stressful world. It's like,
Yeah.
that's,
I mean,
wow.
humans are amazingly adaptive and resilient. I mean, there's babies being born in war zones.
Yeah.
Like I never underestimate our potential for resiliency.
Yeah.
And even though sometimes I like I don't know. I don't know about this line of thought anymore, but I still kind of use it, which is like, it's all part of the story of our story of figuring out how to be human and of just being here. So like, it
Yeah,
just is.
absolutely.
And so, you know, whatever, here I am, and here's my role to just try and share this information and, you know,
Yeah.
see what happens, see if it can make a little ripple on somebody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's impacting me. I'm like, okay, so I have a new, that piece that you shared about sort of the stress deal. I knew that stress was challenging for the body. Obviously, you're in like cortisol, it doesn't feel good, that like the blood's pumping really fast, everything's sort of racing, but it didn't, and I knew it wasn't really good for me, but I didn't really connect that it wasn't good for me because, you know, sort of the nutrition that's going into the body has a choice of either going into supporting the stress or going into supporting the relaxation and sort of baby making hormones. It's like, oh my gosh, like if that's the case, obviously, if we want to support healthy pregnancy, we absolutely have to deal with stress. We absolutely have to deal with sort of those underlying and chronic things that make it challenging to stay relaxed, because without that, and then if we think about the ladies who are sort of in this like puking experience or this like high stress with their other children and they're having a hard time with their experience of this pregnancy, it's like, well, we should be village parenting. You know, it shouldn't be one mom with 4 kids in a house with nobody else around. It should be like mom with aunts and sisters and cousins and nephews and other kids and all that. But a lot of people aren't in a place where they can snap their fingers and create that for themselves right now.
Right.
So learning to deal with those stress hormones in a big way is absolutely super helpful. And then I think also about sort of the experience that people have in a medical setting. You know, I tend towards sort of the free birth, orgasmic home birth, that kind of
Mhm.
like mindset and supporting women in that. But if I think about, a lot of women turn to that because they're having incredibly stressful interactions with their sort of Western industrial pregnancy OB or whatever sort of practitioner they're at, or they're like medically based midwife, whatever that might be. These
Mhm.
women are like having, you know, weekly appointments that are adding to that stress level. Gotta hop in the car, gotta pack all 5 kids with, gotta, you know, whatever that might be. And so there's like that's adding to the stress.
Yeah.
And we absolutely see from thousands of women across the world, hundreds and millions of women across the world over the last 100 years, who have absolutely given birth in their homes, in the backyard, in the dirt, in, you know, the middle of the jungle, wherever it is that they happen to be. There is this absolutely possibility of doing that birth just the way, not even free birth, it's just birth the way that birth has been for ages, which is supported by community and connected to people. And so to see sort of Western medical going, you need to come in and we're going to check your blood pressure and you're going to feel anxious about being here. So your blood pressure is probably going to be high. And then, you know, that whole conversation about cascade of interventions. And I get kind of worked up about that. So we don't necessarily have to talk about that today if you don't want to, because I know not everybody has same viewpoints as I do, or not everybody's sort of in that far down that particular rabbit hole. Um, but can you talk to me a little bit about sort of people and their experience in the medical care setting in terms of IVF, in terms of whatever, and then what you're offering in sort of response to that?
Yeah, so let's see. There's
So
a
much,
lot.
I know.
Okay, let me just okay, so usually if I'm working with someone who is on the IVF path, it's because they want to make sure they're doing everything like holistic as possible.
Hmm.
So there's a range of medical professionals. So some of them are more compassionate and more grounded and more open to really informed consent and respecting a woman's choices, etc. Some of them are like what I consider like dinosaurs because honestly, the standard of care now, even in conventional medicine, is that is informed consent and shared decision making.
Mm.
You, as a doctor, even in the emergency room setting, I've done rotations in emergency room settings, and I've seen them with people who are in like pretty close to life or death situation. I mean, if it's truly life or death, like they're in trauma, they're out, they're going to do their best, hands down, and save that person. But if the person is coherent at all, they explain to them the procedure or the treatment that they would like to do, and they obtain consent before doing it. So that is how medicine should be practiced. And from what I hear from most people, that is not how it is practiced.
Yeah.
I'm starting to hear reports of it a little bit more, that OB-GYN doctors, because this is my world, you know, are being better about explaining the options and then telling the woman, you can choose, here's your options, it's your choice. But it's still not as prevalent as it needs to be, because whether you're going through pregnancy or any other point of life, the best is if people feel autonomy over their body.
Absolutely.
And aren't looking, the doctor is there for educated advice, opinion, to help you understand and process what's going on. Like, I think of myself as like a detective. Like, all right, we're going on your healing journey together, and we're going to explore what's going on, and it's detective work. Because my paradigm that I practice from is that the body is a part of the natural world, the natural order of things, and has its own natural intelligence, and is designed to bring itself into balance and to function super well, and and from a point of this joygasmic life.
Yeah.
That's the design that we are a part of. So the detective work is to figure out what's getting in the way of that, and how can we deal with what's getting in the way of that with as little intervention as possible, so that the momentum that heals and regulate things is that natural intelligence, and the body isn't still depending on this outside input to regulate and be in balance. So we want to intervene as little as possible so that the natural intelligence can do its thing. So there's exceptions to this, like, again, and it goes to people, to intergenerational patterns, to prenatal life. Major things that happen prenatally, they take a lot of work to heal postnatally. And so there is a place for medications, for ongoing supplements, for all the things, for all the interventions. There's a place for that. I'm just tread very lightly, and my job is to make sure we're doing everything we can to support the body's natural intelligence, and not keep creating a dynamic where it's dependent on something. Okay, so that's a huge tangent from your question. But not really, because when women are on are experiencing infertility and already on that path of doing IVF or whatever, that's still my disposition from which I'm working with them. So I want to know. So, like, for example, I have a colleague who went to the same medical school as I did, and has been practicing, has an awesome practice in California, and she's been on a 6-7 year infertility journey.
Wow.
And she does it all. There's a lot of toxins and heavy metals that can create infertility. So she ran all the labs on her and her husband. I mean, the whole thing before beginning IVF. It turns out there's a genetic variation that can cause like an inborn vasectomy in a man. It's really rare. It's a chromosomal genetic variation.
Yeah.
And he was positive for that genetic SNP, we call it. And so over all the years, they did heavy metal chelating because he had high heavy metals. They did a surgery on a varicocele, which is basically fluid in the testicles. They did everything.
Yeah.
From holistic and conventional. And then it turns out they found this. So it's like there's some sperm because there was no sperm coming out in the sperm samples. So, and then it turns out she had some interesting polycystic ovaries as well, but not polycystic PCOS. Anyway, this is just an aside to say, like, there can be some major challenges to achieving fertility. It's still only like 10 I think the latest is like 16% of couples experience infertility.
Okay.
But yeah, so they, I mean, this is Western medicine at its finest because they're able to go directly into the testicles, remove the sperm, and then she found a more natural IVF specialist who uses as low dose hormones as possible to stimulate ovulation and do egg retrieval.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they go through the whole process of fertilizing the eggs. And then they wait several months until her body has completely cleared the drugs that were used to stimulate ovulation,
Mm-hmm.
and then waited until, because her cycles were really good and stable, there was enough progesterone to support a pregnancy, so waited until the natural point in her cycle when implantation would occur naturally, and at that point did the IVF. So the only hormone she required was vaginal progesterone, which is not uncommon to use. If you're not familiar, it's women who have recurrent pregnancy loss will prescribe that vaginally. It doesn't get absorbed systemically.
Hmm.
It doesn't get absorbed into the body at large. It really only acts on the uterus. And in early pregnancy, until the placenta takes over in the second trimester, the uterus must produce enough progesterone to maintain the pregnancy. So in a lot of women, this is extremely effective if there's been recurrent pregnancy loss. So anyway, I hope that connects. So the point is every couple any person who's experiencing infertility, it's an extremely unique situation.
Yeah.
And my job in working with that person is making sure we're covering all the bases we can. And also I really see myself as a support, like even myself going into pregnancy, I had a midwife, I had my colleagues, I had my healer friends. I'm from Hawaii, and all my friends here are either healers or artists. So it's like,
Yeah.
when the midwife I worked with, my appointments are an hour long. She gives me a massages my feet, my tummy. I could ask all the questions. I still found myself Googling every single day and feeling like I couldn't get enough support and like navigating it. So like, I really see my role as creating a more support network so that women and families feel like they have a resource they can rely on to navigate
Absolutely.
the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like, so, like you said, being a detective and sort of going like, oh, like this is the way, and this is the way. You were mentioning had tried so many of the things, all of the things, and it turns out there's like one really unique piece about her husband that's causing this. You touched on heavy metal toxicity. Can you share a little bit more about that in terms of, because I would imagine that in terms of fertility, like often we think about the women, but men have so much of that journey as well. Can you share more about sort of that journey, especially if women have partners who have been doing, like heavy industry type stuff, and how that can impact their fertility journey?
Yeah, so everything I produce and share, I speak to the male counterpart, well, maybe not equally, but I try to emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I love to use this metaphor that it's like like the womb is the garden and the sperm is the seed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quality of your seed really matters. Like anyone who likes to grow food, like you really care about the lineage of the seed. And then of course if you've farmed or gardened at all, you realize the importance of the soil composition as well. And to me, that's like the womb space, right?
Yeah.
So I had a huge emphasis on the seed, on the male part. At least 40% of infertility for couples with infertility, 40% of it is from the man. So it's almost 50-50.
Yeah.
There's interesting data that men who eat a conventional standard American diet have significantly lower sperm count and motility, so function. You need to have enough sperm there, and then they have to be well functioning. And after going on an organic diet within 3 weeks, all their measures increase significantly, like statistically significantly, from a conventional research paradigm
Wonderful.
model.
That's so good to hear. I'm just like, what? Great. Great. Good to
Yeah.
know.
And there's been big long-term studies that look at sperm count. And in the West, and since the 70s, the sperm count has declined 50% in Western men. And these are huge studies, thousands of men. And it's complete opposite in places like India. The one study I'm thinking, big study. I mean, this was on NPR a couple years back, and I was like, oh my God. And then I've been finding the data too, and it's like, yeah, in India, no change whatsoever. So if none of this research is, you have to have like a randomized double blind controlled study to like prove cause and effect. So it's all speculative, like correlations, like how can we think about the differences between like the Western and Eastern world, like populations, what's going on here. And a big thing that comes out of this research is like obesity, diet, moving lifestyle. So like obesity is clear in the data, like causes sperm count to go down, function to go down. But now we know like pesticides as well. And this in particular, it's Roundup, the big hitter,
Glyphosate.
is Roundup.
Yeah.
There's a bunch, I mean, there's almost 100,000 man-made chemicals in the environment. We're interacting with probably up to 10,000 a day. And a lot of them are shown in animal studies to cause infertility. So they cause sperm to stop producing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to I have to like pull it up to like know the specific enzyme pathways, but we can demonstrate in mice models, which have like basically the exact same reproductive system for male and female mice, that when we expose them to these chemicals, sperm production stops.
Right. Yeah. And so if people are exposed to these chemicals, through conventional cosmetics, smells, artificial fragrances, colors and food dyes, inorganic, like non-organic foods that are sprayed with pesticides, grain, like wheat products are a big source of that glyphosate, the Roundup sort of experience. I've got a whole podcast on my rant against glyphosate and Roundup, so we don't need to get into that here. But yeah, so there's like all of these sort of contributing factors that come with, like you said, standard American diet, which is like fast food, hamburgers, even a lot of the stuff that comes in the grocery store that like is, healthy looking, even those like fruits and vegetables, if they're not organic, they still have sort of those residues and those chemicals sprayed on them in the growing process. They might look really good, but they're not necessarily really good for your body in terms of like containing and being connected to those pesticide things. So it's absolutely super important to recognize that and do that dietary work, because like you said, those toxins in the body they're causing inflammation in the body, and free radical damage, which is challenging, like putting the body in like sort of a challenge state. By default, it's not in a resting state. It's not in an optimal health state. It's sort of like struggling to survive, which a lot of people, feel they are. And then we've got all of so all of those environmental toxins that are coming at us, but then also, in terms of obesity, often that's linked to, the fat cells are bonding to those toxic chemicals in order to keep the organs safe from them. So then you've got like high levels of built up toxins that are just stored in your fat tissue. So obviously when we think about all of those things, it makes sense that that's not going to create an optimally fertile body.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I want to
get all of that right from your understanding. That's sort of like my understanding. I just want to check in because you're the more expert on this than me.
There's an excellent resource out there. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's Environmental Working Group, ewg.org. And it was created by Aaron Brockovich, which I think most people probably remember that movie. And they every year do a clean 15, dirty dozen produce list. So the cleanest 15 conventionally grown foods, lowest pesticide residue, and the dirtiest 12. So the ones that you really need to get organic. So, and they also have a whole section of their website where you can type in, they have like 40,000 they have like beauty care, personal care, cleaning companies, all that, where they have tested them. This organization does, all they do is test products and food. So you can rate your products using their resource. It's awesome. You're right about the chemicals. So there's actually a term in the literature. It's called obesogen, and it means chemicals that cause obesity. Again, we love to experiment on science loves to experiment on animals. So you expose the mice to these chemicals and it turns on the pathways that cause obesity. So the chemicals are literally causing the obesity. They're turning on the pathways. They change your metabolism. They change how the metabolism deals with calories. So yeah, with totally normal, healthy couples, no symptoms to speak of, good body mass index for their body type, 4 months is the minimum that I advocate for in preparing for pregnancy. And the first month is a cleanse. It's doing a Whole30 type diet, an elimination-based diet, organic, and then supporting the body's innate detox pathways, making sure there's enough fiber, self-care practices, etc. If there is already an issue that we know of, different types of symptom clusters or significant obesity, then it's at least a year to prepare. That's just my disposition. Of course, I don't want to shame or judge anybody who chooses something differently. I'll try to meet you where you're at and work with wherever. But if we get to choose, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. If there's so much, even if you have been eating healthy, clean for the last 5-10 years, what did you eat as a child? Those things can still be stored in the tissues of the body. They can be stored in and around the organs. All of that hinders our optimal organ function. And so, if people aren't already eating organic and sort of clean in that way, then absolutely there's going to be time you need to sort of adjust to a new diet to get into the habits of doing those things to create that. And those changes are not just for you, they are for the ongoing health of your family, right? Because it's not a short-term change either. It's not like, oh, we're gonna prep for pregnancy for a year, eat really clean for a year, and then go back to our food that was causing us to be sick and unhealthy. It's no, absolutely, this is a radical shift in paradigm, because you're aligning yourself with optimal nutrition, you're aligning yourself with optimal health, and creating the best environment for your children. And it's a little bit sad to say that people are often not really willing to take on that journey unless they're having really big health crises, or unless they're, really wanting the best for their kids. And they're sort of going, oh, I'm doing this for my kids. And I love doing that work with people where it's what are those underlying mental causes that cause you to want to stay in those patterns of eating, junk food that's really not great for you. It's you feel guilty and shameful about it. You feel shameful, then you eat more to aim unraveling those patterns. I love that kind of stuff. And I absolutely enjoy that. And then, but it's really important to know. So you talked about a clean 30 diet, or clean, what did you call it?
Whole30.
Whole30. Okay.
The Whole30 diet is I recommend that a lot for the cleanse, because there you can go whole30.com or whatever, and there's also foods in the store that are Whole30 approved. And so there's tons of resources. There's cookbooks, there's shopping lists, there's all kinds of the most robust resource out there for a cleanse type diet. And the only reason I can endorse it is because it is completely built off of an elimination diet, which is a gold standard in naturopathic medicine of figuring out your food sensitivities. So food sensitivities, also people call them food allergies. I use sensitivity because when most people hear allergy, they think of a big inflammatory response. That's obvious. But if your gut and your immune system is sensitive to proteins in certain foods, it'll create a immune response in the gut. So the body develops actually antibodies to certain foods, and it causes inflammation in the gut, which of course causes inflammation everywhere. And So we do a lot of blood work to test the blood and see what antibodies are floating around, which is pretty good, but it's not the best for really figuring out and healing from those food sensitivities. The best thing is the elimination diet, which the Whole30 diet is modeled after.
Got it.
So I appreciate that organization because they have so many resources now available for people, but it's basically like no grains, no processed sugars, no legumes, no beans, no dairy, all the big heavy hitters that are known to cause inflammation in the gut. And it's like, it should be called the whole 45 or 60 because you need to go 30 days, 100% on, absolutely no introducing any of these potential triggers to your system. And then after that 30 days, you need to do a strategic reintroduction. So after 30 days, I really want my first thing to be cheddar cheese. That's it. I'm doing cheddar cheese for, the next 3 days. And that's it. That's the only other food I'm bringing back in. And then I monitor my symptoms and my reactions. So long term, if the gut is really tight and healed and functioning well, and you have an awesome microbiome, there should not be an issue with eating any of those foods. There might be an issue if you eat them every day, 3 times a day, but the body should be able to deal with some foods that may, when there's too much, be inflammatory, but here and there, no problem. So like people like get freaked out about like,
forever losing their favorite foods, right?
Yeah, having a restrictive diet, but I really try to like emphasize, look, this is temporary, and like in the long term, people feel so much better. So this was the first month in my course was the cleanse and using the Whole30. And one of the couples, the husband has chronic heartburn, all the time heartburn. And it went away completely, 100%. Because there's not that inflammation. Like for some people, heartburn is inflammation in the gut.
Yeah. So I'm curious because you mentioned like grains, legumes, beans, and like generally those are things that people think of as sort of staples, like the world has functioned and grown to its success on grains, legumes, and beans in a large part. And I'm just curious about sort of your thoughts, wisdom on whether or not that's because we're not soaking them. Do you have any thoughts around that?
I think a lot of it is because of conventional farming.
Okay.
Even organic is like has some cross contaminations and soil quality and whatnot. I mean, soaking them is always better, and probably also because of gut permeability from other stressors on the gut. So like, yeah, a healthy gut should have no issue with beans, legumes, all of that. Those are actually awesome foods. They're high in like, they're high in different composition that feed the healthy bacteria. I'm thinking of butyrate, for example, like lentils, super, super healthy food. But we could all benefit from from taking a break on all of them for a while, just to give our gut the best chance at really healing itself and fortifying itself. So like the Whole30 diet is like vegetables, fruits, lean meats, minimally processed nuts and seeds, healthy fats, avocados. You can do ghee. But it's probably a lot of it is like just taking out the processed sugar, no alcohol, drinking coffee black instead of adding cream and honey to it. So it's the whole thing. I'm not going to say like the grains and the legumes are to blame, but it's just part of this bigger picture that's going on where the gut is just having to work too hard and stressed out. And so let's take away all the things for a while that the gut has to work harder on to process and give it easiest things to digest that for the most part cause the littlest bit of inflammation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just curious because we've talked a lot about sort of the emotional and the physical side in terms of this so far. So I'm really curious about your thoughts around sort of spiritual preparation for conception, for pregnancy, or in relation to infertility.
This is like, you know, possibly one of my favorite aspects of being to tune into is like the spiritual um side of things. I think that my belief and my feelings is like when we are like cosmic energy, a soul is coming through. I think it's important to tune into that prior to conception and really like feel into spirit, whatever that means for somebody. Everybody has a different relationship with spirit. You know, even people who don't consider themselves spiritual or religious, maybe they love nature. Maybe they love just like being out in nature and going for a hike. So that might just look like going for some walks in nature and tuning into the natural world and the interconnected. It's really about the interconnectedness that we all share, being part of this planet together. It's like we're not just on the planet, we're part of the planet. And so like
Absolutely.
I felt my baby spirit for a couple years, like just kind of nagging me because I do a lot of um uh like meditation and spiritual work where like it's important to me to try to like just tune into the vibration of nature, into the stillness. I think I'm a huge fan of Eckhart Tolle.
Hmm.
I named my son Eckhart.
A huge fan, clearly. Yeah, that's beautiful.
But his name is Eckhart Kavaiola. It means living water.
Hmm.
And I didn't have his first name when he was born. We had a kind of a list, but not really. We just didn't have his first name. I'm like, we'll get it when he's born. The second I looked at him and he looked at me, I heard his name like kept going over and ringing in a bell in my head, like baby Eckhart, baby Ecky.
Oh.
So it was like crystal clear, like there was no denying it. So like, okay, he looked like a miniature Eckhart Tolle. He was just like this monk alien guy.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So anyway, Eckhart Tolle talks about the stillness. Like that's the key is to go into the stillness, into the spaciousness of life, to having a life where you can feel just at peace.
Hmm.
And so I think that's like for me that's how I access spirit, is trying to just tune into the spaciousness, into the stillness of life, and just feeling what is there, what just being open to it and feeling it. Try not to like define it too much, because then that kind of puts us more into like the mental thinking part of ourselves. And really, as far as I understand with spirit, it's about the beingness of life. It's about being, not so much like there's like, again, Eckhart Tolle, he talks about the human being, and we're all like for the most part really obsessed with the human part of things, like the do I'm a human, I function, I do this, but not the being. Like that's the shift. And it's not even a shift. It's about being integrated, an integrated organism, integrated in our own self and integrated with the whole of nature, of the natural world. And in order to feel integrated, we have to allow ourselves to be, to tune into the being, into the stillness, into the spaciousness of life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like when we're in that spaciousness, like there's very little room for cortisol, right? We're very much
Totally.
in that like peaceful, calm space, that connected space. And
Totally.
yeah.
And if there is a need for cortisol, it's a true need. Like cortisol has its function in being on this planet. It's to respond with urgency to whatever is taking place, because your being is under threat. Your human, not your being, your human is under threat. Your being is forever, is
Yeah.
the human is under threat. So respond. But
Yeah.
that's it. Like that's the design is like, it's in the moment, respond, and then go back into the being. don't let that become your entire existence. Otherwise, man, it's hard. It makes life really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I lived in that for many, many years, that like constant cortisol thing. And there's this beautiful power pose that I learned of just opening your arms and putting your head back and holding that for like a minute, and what an effect that has on the physiology of our body. Because often we're in stress, we're in fight or flight. There's this like curl
Yep.
up, clamp up, like sort of like pull in that happens, and we feel not powerful. When we open our arms up, we put our neck back, we say like, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm the biggest thing in the room, and I'm vulnerable, you know, I'm safe here, I'm completely safe here. And I teach this with like all of my clients, because it's so incredible to be able to just hold a pose for like a minute and have your physiology change, have your entire body change over, and do something radically different. You know, maybe I know a lot of moms don't feel like they have the time to go to do yoga class or do meditation or go for a walk because they've got other kids going on. It's a lot of cortisol to get, you know, 2 kids, 5 kids all dressed up and outside in the winter, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And so little body hacks like that, where we can really change our experience. Even thinking about time in nature has a calming effect if you can't actually get out into nature. You know, there's lots of things that we can do to bring that peacefulness and that connection in.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Mm.
beautiful. I can feel that beingness.
Yeah.
Are you interested in sharing do you have just Eckhart, your one son, or do you have more than that?
I just have him. Yeah. Yeah, I can go. He's just running around upstairs right now with his dad.
Oh, I was just curious if you were interested in sharing a little bit about your birth experience with him. You know, you mentioned your pregnancy was challenging, and one of the things I love sharing on the podcast is birth stories from
Mhm.
women. So if that's something you're interested in sharing, I'd love to dive into that.
Yeah, for sure. We had an incredible birth. So I was like totally, reading, I read the orgasmic birth book. Like I was committed to really just trusting my body and allowing my body and my baby to birth. And also I love this idea of breathing my baby out, of just like breathing and allowing my body to do the work as much as possible. So um there's so many dynamics to birth. Is like, to me it's like a portal, but it's also like it's teaching us. It's there to teach us. Like we have so many lessons we can learn from our birth. um so I was in labor for 4 days. We were having a home birth with a midwife. I was in labor for 4 days. We had a tub set up and everything. The first 2 days were like so mellow. Now thinking back on it, like I shouldn't have considered that like full on labor. It was more of like the preparatory prodromal labor,
Mm-hmm.
really chill contractions. I just danced the whole time. Like every time I felt it, I would just like dance and like shake my booty and like had I was like, this feels good. Like this is awesome. Like I loved it. And then as it built and got more intense, like my husband and I were just oming together the whole time, like every time just oming together and breathing together. And there wasn't almost anywhere I didn't really feel pain the whole time. It was intense. It got built more and more and became more and more intense, but I wouldn't register it as painful. It was just like, wow. So as we were going into the 4th night, so I was fully dilated for several hours, and my baby was turned. His head was turned. He hadn't made like the final turn and drop, so he wasn't fully crowning. And at this point, I had been in labor for several days, a couple days of full blown labor. And like I said, he was still like not crowning, not presenting himself. And we were about to go into another night, and my husband actually was like, babe, like I think we need to transfer. Like,
Mm.
I don't want to see you. I don't want to go through another night of this. Like, I think we need more support than we're getting here. He had a lot of issue with the support we were getting from the midwives.
Mm.
It's fun, but I don't I I don't want to say too much about that here. I didn't. I felt supported and like everything was good. I wasn't even at that point, I wasn't worried, I wasn't scared. I was just like, okay, like let's see what happens.
Trusting of your body, trusting of the process of birth,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
knew
if
he
you're
was
not feeling pain as well, like if you're in like a wow, this is intense, like there's nothing to be scared of there
I
for you,
wasn't, I could
right?
still feel my baby moving with the whole time. I felt okay. I mean, I got to the point where I was like, oh my God, this is starting to feel like a bad trip. Like, I need to get out of this trip. Like, oh my God. But that was I just started to feel delirious. I think I was dehydrated.
Okay.
So, but I was getting dehydrated because okay. So thinking back on it, I would have, if I knew then what I knew now, which is impossible, I would
Yeah.
not get in the tub as much. I was in the tub so much and it was warm and I was sweating, but every time I got in the tub, it would slow down my labor. And it felt
Uh,
so good. It took, if there was any pain, it took it all away. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. The tub was amazing. The tub, and most people know this, but for some reason it didn't happen during my birth. You don't get in the tub until like way later. Like you have to like just move through the intensity. Like you're not supposed to get in the tub earlier because it is known to slow progress. Whatever.
yeah.
I was in the tub a lot. I labored an entire night in the tub. So
Wow.
yeah. So
Wow.
anyway,
And would your labor slow down during the day or sort of pause during the day and then it would come back at night, or was it all day for
it
multiple
was
days?
it never paused. It kept going. It was just my contractions never got like that shortness in between. It needs to be that like every
Okay.
3 to 5 minutes. They would go like every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes, every
Okay.
20 minutes, every 5 minutes. It was still like all over the place and not getting to the time. I didn't feel an urge to push that whole time, or
Got
like
it.
the fetal ejection reflex or anything like that.
Yeah.
So by the time husband was saying, babe, like, I really want more support. I want to know that my baby's okay, that you're okay. Like, this has been going for a while. I was like dehydrated, feeling pretty delirious. And I'm like, okay. So my
Mm.
mom was there, my best friend was there, the two midwives that were there, the husband was there. That's a whole nother issue in itself. Like, way too many people. But
Yeah,
I'm like, oh,
absolutely.
such a social, like, I love to be social. I love my people. And I'm like, no, this is great. My mom, I love her so much, but she was extremely stressed out the whole time.
Yeah,
She kept asking,
which totally hinders labor, which totally hinders your body from coming into like a really beautiful relaxation place. Not to mention if she hasn't processed your birth trauma, or if you
which
haven't processed your experience of birth trauma, like that can cause issues.
100%.
Yeah.
Like, I love she tried her best. She did everything she could, but like, I would just tell anyone to be extremely cautious about inviting their mom to the birth, because again, the thing you're say I think is probably the most relevant, in that their mom's traumas around birth is most of the time has not been dealt with, and that really came through. So anyway, there was all that scene. So anyway, we're transferring now. Everyone gets kind of stressed out and intense, and I'm like, you guys, like, focus. Like, we're not in an emergency. We're not transferring because of emergency. We're still all good. We're just getting more support. Like, calm down. So here's the woman in 4 days of labor, like, asking her people to calm down.
Claiming the space, claiming it's like, no panic, people. We're just doing we're
Yeah,
doing this because this is what my husband needs to feel more supported, right?
pretty
Yeah.
much. And it worked out
Oh, we
really
had a little lag
well.
there.
So the doctor right away felt that baby was still turned and not dropped in enough, and she recommended right away an epidural and some rest. She's like, you've been in labor way outside the window of what like we would do here, so I'm
Mm.
willing to give you a couple hours to relax and sleep and see if that relaxes your pelvic floor. a little bit more to help baby descend. And then they were able to put this giant peanut pillow, it's called, in between my legs. I laid on either, I flipped side to side, which created a lot of openness in my pelvis, and I could just be still and rest for a couple hours. So of course I resisted the epidural at first, and tried to push for a while, but nothing was coming. Nothing was changing. And also from reading the Orgasmic Book Birth, I knew it was an option to ask for a lower dose epidural, which I did. And they were able to modify the dose a little bit. And so anyway, I slept for 2 hours. Boom, they checked me. Waters had broken. Baby was right there. I pushed him out in 20 minutes. And
Wow.
it was amazing. And because I had that lower dose epidural, I could still feel my contractions. Like I could tell them, usually they watch the monitor and then they tell you to push based on what they're seeing on the screen. But because I was still able to feel everything and in tune, I was in complete control of that process. And I would tell them, okay, here comes one, here we go. And I could still feel my baby move through me and everything. So it's not a standard way epidural is used. Usually if a woman's fully dilated, they're not going to use an epidural.
Mm-hmm.
They don't almost ever. This was like an off label use of.
Yeah. I mean, you had advocated for yourself to say, this is how you can use this, and this is how you can utilize this tool to support me based on your advice. Just like you said, is like advocating for yourself for what still works for you. And that's incredible to hear that, often when we hear stories about epidural, it's like epidural and cascade of interventions that go along with this. So it's really lovely to hear a story where it's like, oh, like at a low dose, you could still feel your baby, still feel your vagina, still connected with that process. And yeah. So then the experience, you said you were sort of in this like delirium beforehand. How did that change, or were you still in connection with that sort of psychedelic quality of the labor? Tell me more about that.
So they gave me an IV at the hospital and rehydrated me and said that also my urine was extremely dark. So I was dehydrated. Oh, and also in the beginning, my baby's heart rate wasn't responding as much to the contractions as they like to see it. But as soon as we had that IV, everything, he was back on. He was responding. So I was dehydrated. I think that was contributing to why I felt so out of it. Which the midwives could have done at home, but it was just like too little too late. Like that should have been done like several hours earlier. But again, midwives' job, most midwives see their job as to stay out of the way as much as possible and let the woman birth. So I don't fault them for that. That's the paradigm they work with. And I want to say too, like when I got to the hospital, the first things they were doing, they started poking me, they started strapping me with the bands and stuff. So I like immediately was like, all right, listen, what are you doing? I'm like, you are not allowed to do anything to my body or my baby's body without informing me of what you want to do and then obtaining my consent for it. And it was like pretty intense moment because they're not used to doing that.
Yeah.
But once I made that clear, they were extremely respectful and we had an amazing experience at the hospital. They took super good care of us to the point of where they like offered me a jug of water and they're like, do you want this water? Like it is in plastic.
You're like, thanks, ladies.
I'm like, sure, give me the water. Like I'm good. Like I just need water. Yeah, it's fine. Like, they asked my consent for giving me water. So they were fine. And I wasn't a jerk about it, although my husband says I was pretty crazy. But
well, I mean, you're in labor, so the way that you're communicating doesn't have that normal sort of prefrontal cortex of this is how I ask politely, this is how I respond politely. That's sort of shut off. So I'm sure you probably were kind of intense about it, but also it's like they're used to dealing with laboring women. So
yeah, they were great. We really got on the same page. And also the doctor had said early on, like, okay, we'll do the epidural. And then if we need to, like, we can try using like the vacuum or something like that. And I literally was like, what? Because so much of my work is around birth and like those interventions.
Yeah.
And he's like, I see your lip quivering, like you're pouting, like, but my goal is to give your baby a vaginal birth. Like that's the goal here. And then it just like clicked in my mind, like, look, whatever happens is
we dropped out. So
oh, okay. Yeah.
I realized that whatever happens, I have the resources and the network to heal.
Hmm.
Like any, all of these experiences are lessons and opportunities in healing and in like evolution, on my own personal evolution and in my healing journey. So I just surrendered to the unfolding of it all and knowing I was so well resourced to heal from it all
Hmm.
and take care of my baby. I'm like I study cranial sacral and applications for infants in particular, post birth. So I'm like, I have all these tools. If my baby needs some suction to get out of me, like whatever, I'll heal him from that. Like whatever it takes, like baby needs to
Yeah.
get out.
Yeah. So then what
And it
happened?
was,
So you're having this conversation, and then what happens?
and then he, after like 2 hours of resting and having that big prop in between my legs so that my pelvis was really opened, he was right there. And um, he came out just so beautifully in 20 minutes of pushing. And the nurses and the doctor were like actually shocked. Like after my first push, the doctor's like, oh, okay, this baby's coming. I'm gonna go get a setup. And then um they were just like because I was on my back, which was unfortunate because I did tear a little bit. And I feel like the positioning and the coaching of the pushing was played a factor in that, but maybe not, whatever. Again, all part of my story. Um, but they were so impressed. They were like, yes, mama. And they're like, because was pulling my legs back and they're like, whoa, you're really flexible. And the doctor, there was a nurse who was helping me and she was like 8 months pregnant. And the doctor was like, turned to her and was like, yeah, you might think twice about that prenatal yoga, huh?
Yeah.
So they were awesome. And I just felt like, so again, my vision all pregnancy was to just breathe my baby out and to not even push, to just breathe
Mhm.
through it.
Mhm.
And then when it came time to push him out and I was pushing with every bit of me, I felt like the most powerful I've ever felt in my life. It was the best. I was like, why the hell would I ever think I didn't want to push? Pushing was the best thing I've ever done in my life. So it's just amazing, like what we learn through birth. But yeah, I pushed him right out. He came out in 20 minutes, which was pretty awesome for first time birth.
Yeah, yeah, and it must have been so relieving after sort of 4 days and then having that experience of transferring and having to claim your power and calling everybody out and being like, "You gotta check with me before you do anything,"
Mhm.
to have him out. And what was it like to have him in your arms those first moments after he was born? What do you remember of that?
It was just, he didn't cry at all. And he was just like, so just, he has the most piercing eyes. He still does. And in that moment, he just looked me dead in the eye and with so much clarity in his eyes. Like he's never had that kind of like glazed over baby look that they have sometimes when they're infants. And then something I remember the most, and that's kind of like one of the addictive things about having babies for me, that I'm like, ooh, like this feeling I just want to feel again, is he was so wet and like his skin was so thin and translucent and just like there's no other uh, experience like from any point, like the tactile, the smell, where where you get to experience that than like a newborn.
Hmm.
And I just remember that, just the feeling of him, of his little body and the way he looked at me. It was amazing. I was so happy. I honestly, my baby's about to be 15 months and I feel like I still haven't come down from that high of
Ah.
being in this like bliss bubble with him.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, and that's the gift of like a natural birth. That's the gift of vaginal birth. That's the gift of, being connected and autonomous in that experience, calling the shots and setting boundaries, is that continuity of connection, of that that beautiful hormonal matrix imprinting into our next section of life, saying, wow, if I can do that, I can do anything. If I can, having done that, there's an incredible possibility. He's 15 months now. So what was your immediate postpartum like with him?
It was great. I really wanted to do a full lotus birth with his placenta and not do any cutting. Um, so the doctor was willing to do that with me. They didn't cut the cord. They took really good care, we brought all of our supplies for that to take care of the placenta. My husband was so funny. First thing he says when we got in there was, no circumcision and we're keeping the placenta. Just like,
Gotta set those boundaries, otherwise.
Broadcast that to everyone in the room.
Yeah.
There are protocols, which is whatever, it's fine. But anyway, so they were very respectful. The pediatrician, I did end up, after about 4 hours, we did end up removing it. And we did keep the placenta, but because we were in the hospital and there's more handling going on and more opportunity for germ exposure versus like if we were in our bedroom for the next few days as planned. I just felt like, okay, the benefit outweighs the risk outweighed the benefit at that point. And I did make sure that he stayed connected for several hours. And then I think the most important part of separating, if you are going to, is bringing in like a spiritual dimension to it. And so when that did happen, I communicated to my baby, like, we're going to take your cord off now. And, I'm going to take care of you now. And it's okay to let go with the placenta, and like just communicated directly to him what was happening and let him know that I would take over. So that was really important to me. So I still felt like there was so it wasn't a shock for him to be removed from his placenta. And then they were extremely attentive to us. We stayed for like 24 hours, and my midwife came and visited, and she brought my herbs and the peri rinse, which I think is like one of the most important things for postpartum, is that they give you the peri bottle, like the wash to wash on when you go to the bathroom. But my midwives brought me in like a really strong herbal brew. So that helped so much with the inflammation and everything that was going on in my yoni from delivering that little guy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean,
and then we just know.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was a really pleasant experience. They really respected us and they took super good care of us. And then we got to pretty much go right home after, just barely 24 hours.
Wonderful. Well, that's such good news. And so what was in that peri rinse? If you don't mind sharing the recipe.
I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's comfrey leaf, lavender, a calendula, maybe one other herb. I still have the bag. I'll have to double check. One of my girlfriends here, who is actually pregnant at the same time as me, she has a little apothecary business here on the Big Island, and it's her blend.
Okay.
It was her blend. So I can link you with that as well. She makes a handful of really nice herbal products.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean,
and then so I had that, and then when I got home, I would make a sitz bath with it and actually just sit in it and soak, and that was amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, I know so many moms who swear by the sitz bath, and then I'm doing yoni steaming certification right now to help people with that experience, and that's got its own sort of set of absolutely incredible health benefits and recovery. It's speeding up recovery and keeping everything really supple and soft and well moisturized down there in sort of that postpartum recovery. So lots of good resources around that, especially for women who've had tearing. Tearing doesn't have to happen during birth, but it does happen during birth sometimes. And it's absolutely important to think about that ahead of time and pre-plan.
Yep. I mean, even when there's not tearing, my sister-in-law delivered at home and she didn't tear at all, but she was still extremely sore, extremely sore. So I sent her the herbs and everything, and that was like a lifesaver for her in the sitz bath. So
Wonderful. Well, I wanna thank you so much for your time today, Sierra. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on or share with the women who are listening before we close up today?
I feel pretty complete. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk on all these, about all these different topics. It was awesome.
Yeah, we covered a lot of stuff, and I really appreciate you sharing your birth story. It's really beautiful to hear about, really spiritually satisfying, pleasurable, non-painful births that do include sort of a hospital transfer. That's new for me. I've maybe listened to a few too many horror stories, so it's really lovely to be like, oh, it can be done really beautifully and well in all, like, across all different ways. And yeah, so I'm really grateful for you sharing that story, and then also your wisdom. And if people, you mentioned you're doing like a
Mhm.
preconception course right now. Is that ongoing, or is that something you open up certain times of the year? Tell me a little bit about that before we wrap up.
And then we'll see. I'll definitely keep offering it, evolving. So like the next program will be the first trimester, and then the second trimester, third, fourth, the first year of life. So my program is going to keep growing, but I will continue to offer the preconception journey. The best way is to stay connected and all that is my website, babycentered.com. And then my Instagram handle too, I'm always posting on, is just at babycentered.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I highly encourage anybody, if you're in preconception phase and you're looking for support. Sierra and I connected because she responded back to a question I had, and I was like, wow, that is such a thorough and coherent and loving response to my question. I know I can trust her for wisdom and support around this preconception journey. So yeah, absolutely. If people feel called to connect with you and are on that journey, absolutely encourage them to do that. And I'm super grateful for your time today, Sierra. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I know we've just skimmed the very surface of your knowledge, but also a beautiful opportunity to dive deep with you into some of these topics as well. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to today's interview with me. There is so much more waiting for you. Bonus meditations, brain training tracks, and access to our online school, which includes courses like Relationship Reset, Circles of Commitment, How to Save Your Relationship and How to Save Your Marriage, How to Make Intelligent Decisions as a Single Mom When You Begin Dating Again, and many other courses, including the Joygasmic Birth Course, your complete guide to creating a joyful, ecstatic, pain-free, and pleasurable birth.
And that it was simply a matter of noticing how much you've already been doing this. You may choose to feel that this moment is the moment that completely and utterly into your body. Or in the days and weeks ahead, getting curious about how fully and completely this experience has transformed your life. Realizing that you are at complete choice to choose how you would like to integrate this information into every cell of your being.